Dr. M. Kamalakannan, Assistant Professor, Presidency College Chennai. He is a wonderful person and a very important person for the evening. Sir is here to give us an important key address and to talk about Mr. Kamalakannan. He has a lot of wonderful interest on films, critical theory, visual arts, modern Tamil literature, and Latin American literature. He has published a monograph on Alfred Hitchcock in Tamil and a translation of letters by eminent personalities titled Kalathai Vendra Kadidangal and Basics of Literary and Critical Theory in English. Sir has published poems in international anthologies and loves to do oil painting and charcoal sketching. Without much ado, sir, it's indeed our immense pleasure to have you in the midst of us. And sir, you are a person of a scholarly repute, so we are really honored to have you. Sir, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahul. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, salam alaikum, and good evening to all of you present over here. Firstly, I want to thank the principal of New College and the vice principal and all my friends in New College, especially Dr. Vijay Kumar and Alpha Universal Academy for giving me this wonderful opportunity and a wonderful platform to meet you all. So the topic, whichever is given to me, is research methodology and application of theory. Shall I share my screen?
Yes, sir.
One second. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. It is.
Okay, okay.
Yes, sir.
Fine. Yeah. So this will be the outline for today's presentation. The keynote utter speaker has already laid the platform so well so that I can sail smoothly. So I will be explaining the difference between method and methodology, and I'll be touching upon explaining what is text and what is theory, and also the different broad areas which are pertaining to theoretical approaches, right from the classical, modern, postmodern, and the quite recent developments. Okay. The very first thing, as the keynote utter speaker has said, there is a difference between method and methodology. These two terms are often confused. So what exactly is a research method? To put it very succinctly, research methods are the processes the researcher uses or applies during or to conduct the research. So what they do, how they operate, and the various techniques they use to conduct a research or carry out a research is called the method. And it is very much domain specific. You cannot clear-cutly say that this is the method one has to use or one has to adopt and all that. It differs from person to person, researcher to researcher, what topic or what area they're going to do research. Say, for example, in this presentation, I'll be confining mostly to literary research, okay, not even ELT. In the case of ELT, their data collection, their surveys, their observations would be entirely different. Whereas in literary research, our approach is completely different. So what exactly are the techniques involved in carrying out the research is called the method. So for example, number one, collection of data. In literary research, what is data? Obviously, the primary sources and the secondary sources, isn't it? In addition to that, we also add theory. So what is the mode of collection of data? We have libraries, online resources, etc., journals, magazines, interviews, even today, YouTube videos, other things are used. Okay, so this is the collection of data. Imagine if somebody is doing a kind of sociological survey. They're going to have some data upon inquiring awareness upon certain things. Say, for example, recently green products are getting a kind of wide market and a kind of trending. So what is the awareness of green products in one particular region in Tamil Nadu, say Chennai or Coimbatore or any other city for that matter? So they will be conducting a survey. They'll be distributing questionnaires and collecting the primary data by conducting interviews and all that. So that will become the primary data. So depending on the domain in which you are going to do research, your method will be different. Fine. So what is the aim of this method? Simply put, it aims at finding conclusions. And sometimes it could even test a theory. And what exactly is research methodology? As Sarah has already pointed it out, it is a systematic theoretical analysis of the conduct of research. Okay. We can even say it is the application of particular theory or theories to the content. Fine. Previously, when I said research method aims to find solutions or answers, in what way research methodology is different? Simply put, research methodology aims in the understanding or to find credible answers. In other words, logical answers to the research questions. So this slide shows you how research method and methodology are different from each other. Research method is a process. How do you actually carry out the research? Right from data collection till the writing process, it is the method. And the methodology is the theoretical positioning adapted by the researcher. Fine. Now, method is trying to find out answers to the research questions. Any research would begin with the objectives and the right kind of research questions. And obviously, you need to find answers to the research questions. Initially, you form the hypothesis, and later you will either prove or disprove your hypothesis. That will become the thesis. Fine. And what is methodology and what it aims for? It aims to find credible answers. In other words, logical and plausible. Simply put, this is the very purpose of theory, I would say, to present you with a logic. Especially in criticism, there is one particular term which is very popular, that is objective criticism. I really have my own doubts. Any such objective criticism is really possible. Because when you read a text, you form strong ideas and impressions which are quite personal. But how those personal opinions and ideas would qualify in the academic scenario? You can write a review, you can pass a comment, but when you write a research paper, when you write a thesis, you need, concretely sustainable material to prove your thesis. So that is where you need the support of theory or the methodology. Fine. Say, for example, Hamlet, which is a very, very popular tragedy by William Shakespeare. Now, there's a researcher who is raising this question. Why Hamlet is postponing? He knows that his father was killed by his uncle. He is getting several chances to kill his uncle. Despite that, he is not doing it. In fact, he is finding out his own reasons. There is one particular scene where the uncle was praying and Hamlet happens to pass that way. There is nobody else. He is unarmed and Hamlet is carrying his sword, but still he is not killing him. And he is finding out an excuse. He says, if I kill someone who is praying, he will go to heaven. And I don't want to kill him because he is praying now. That sounds completely absurd. If you want to kill somebody, if you want to avenge somebody, you have to simply go and kill. But he is keep on postponing the murder. Fine. So this is the research question you have raised. What answer you can give? Maybe you can simply say Hamlet is a lazy person. Hamlet is very confused. Hamlet is partially mad, or he is extremely attracted to his mother, whatever. But none of them would qualify to be in a kind of theoretical positioning. Say, for example, one person says Hamlet is very much attracted to his mother, and he wanted to kill his father and he wanted to possess his mother, and he couldn't do it. But he found his uncle Claudius has done it. So Hamlet is positing himself in the place of Claudius, which is why he couldn't kill him. Again, this is a very good argument. But the question is whether this argument would qualify as theory. So this is where you need the support of theoretical positioning. When you say this, you will have to add a term, an expression. Hamlet suffers from Oedipus complex. The moment you say Oedipus complex, people will get alarmed. Oh my God, what it is. It is not, what to say, purely literary. It is a kind of psychological term promulgated by Sigmund Freud, again, a big name in psychology, who is considered to be the father of psychoanalysis. And now this particular statement is getting an attention. So initially, Hamlet's character was considered to be very enigmatic. And once you say it is Oedipus complex, there's a kind of logical sustaining argument that is given to the same argument. So this is what theory does. Now this answer becomes more logical, more plausible, because the answer is sustained by theory. Fine. And what method does? Method helps you to frame hypothesis, and methodology helps you to prove or what to say, sometimes disprove the arguments. Okay. In the case of method, it is trying to form valid and reliable knowledge, whereas hypothesis or whereas methodology is trying to prove the arguments in a very concrete manner, supported by theoretical stuff. To put it very simply, method is the actual construction, and methodology is the construction plan. Without the construction plan, you cannot go for the actual construction. So this is the simple difference you can remember regarding method and methodology. Right. Now, next thing is text. What is text? What can be studied? Initially, anything that is printed or published which is carrying an author's name was considered to be a text. But after the advent of cultural studies, anything and everything can be a text. Not only literary works, it can be a film, it can be a painting, it can be a photograph, it can be a performance. Anything can become a text. And you can use the theories, whatever you have studied, to any of these texts. A text is not just a literary one, not just a published or printed one. In other words, we can say a text is a product of socio-historic, economic, and political culture. If you take any text for that matter, you can very well see that particular text is a product of that particular socio-political or historical, production. To put it very simply, think about Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Tale of Two Cities can be written by Charles Dickens only in that particular context, in that particular juncture, with the background of the French Revolution and all that. Can you imagine an Indian writer from India, that too writing in regional languages, can he write a work like that? I don't think that is really that much possible. And similarly, a great work like Kaval Kotam in Tamil by Su Venkatesan, which is a Sagittya Academy winner. In my opinion, that is the only historical novel ever written. Let it be Kalki or Chandelian or anybody for that matter, they have all written historical romances. This is the very first historical novel which is, well documented. So again, Kaval Kotam can be written only in Tamil because it deals or traces with one particular, rise and fall of a community. One particular Kutra Parambare, I would say. So, text is a product of socio-economic, political, and historical culture. Right. Now, next question is, what is theory? As I've already said, theory is something which gives you logic for your research questions to find credible, logical, plausible answers. In other words, I can also say theory is a tinted lens. Now, you may ask me, why should you use the word lens? You should have said glass. You know what a tinted lens is? A tinted lens is a lens which is colored. Say, for example, it could be red, it could be green, it could be yellow, any other color for that matter. So if you use that particular lens, any object that you see through that lens would appear in that particular color. And why I'm using the word lens is something which magnifies the entity seen through it, isn't it? So theory is something which is a tinted lens through which you see a text. That particular entity will present one particular dimension more prominently than others. Say, for example, you want to read a feminist reading of a poem. Anything for that matter. One of the most popular examples was Andrew Marvell's To My Coy Mistress. To My Coy Mistress was considered to be a love poem, a poem which tries to emphasize the idea of carpe diem and all that, seize the time, seize the moment and all that. But when you look at it from a feminist deconstructive view, the entire poem appears to be a blackmail. The man is not trying to seduce the girl. Instead, he is blackmailing the girl. If you don't sleep with me, this is what will happen to you. So this is what theory could do. So which is why I call theory is a tinted lens. If you use a feminist lens, feminism will be more prominent. If you use a Marxist lens, Marxist ideas, the class divisions will be more prominent. If you use psychological lens, the psychological aspects of the novel would be, the text would be more prominent. So theory is a tinted lens. In other words, we can also say theory is something which is borrowed from various other disciplines of humanities and quasi-scientific concepts. Why I say humanities and quasi-scientific concepts is simply because there are theories which are borrowed from sociological theories such as Marxism, and you have scientific theories such as psychoanalysis. Okay, and none of them are directly connected to literature, but those theories are borrowed, those concepts are borrowed and utilized in literary interpretation or textual interpretation, right? So these are all some of the approaches of the past. Of course, Tulkapir is still relevant. Why? Because especially in the ecological studies, the Tinai concept is very much used. And in the Sanskrit tradition, you have the rasa, dvani, etc., etc. And Plato, though we cannot exactly term him as a literary critic, in his Republic, you can find various ideas of literature, especially his comments on poets, all randomly strewn. And Aristotle, one of the very important first literary critics or theorists, who has given us a lot of principles and rules for plays, especially tragedy. There is another theory that Aristotle has written a second part of poetics, which deals with comedy, but it was burnt. It is purely, a kind of conjecture, which is not a proven historical fact. If anyone of you have read The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, you can very well understand that. That is Aristotle. His poetics, his different ideas pertaining to tragedy, the tragic hero, the three unities of time in the play, all these rules and regulations which are prescribed for a play. If you ask me whether those ideas are still relevant, the answers are very much obvious. Why? Because he has not read William Shakespeare. So William Shakespeare was born a bit late. And all the ideas whichever were promulgated by Aristotle were disproved by Shakespeare himself. Say, for example, the three unities of time, place, and action. Shakespeare never maintained any of those. Some of his plays would go beyond 20 years. And in the same play, you will find different places and multiple plots and all that. And again, another important idea, the tragic hero must be a great personality. He must be a king or a general or a warrior, whatever. And all his, what to say, great tragic heroes are really, what to say, uh, great people. Let it be Macbeth or Othello, King Lear, and all that. But if you move a bit later, you could very well see there are playwrights who have proved even this idea is completely wrong. Wrong in the sense, what to say, it is not necessary. Arthur Miller's most famous tragedy, um, The Death of a Salesman, where the protagonist, the hero, is a salesman. He is not a great personality. He is not, what to say, a celebrity. He is not enjoying any kind of very high social status. But the tragedy has really appealed all over the world. So, and then you have the romantic approaches of William Wordsworth, with the poetic diction and all that. And very importantly, what you have is the context-based approaches, especially Marxism, as I mentioned earlier, which is borrowed from social theory or sociological theory. Again, there is no consensus within Marxist theory itself. The classical Marxism looked at, what to say, society in a different manner, whereas the neo-Marxists are completely different, especially Louis Althusser and his notions of ideology. Ideology and ideological state apparatuses gives a complete different view about what to say, the society, about Marxism, etc., etc. There are two different kinds of what to say, apparatuses. One is um, repressive state apparatuses, and another one is ideological state apparatuses. Repressive are using violence or what to say, their strength in order to control the masses, whereas ideological state apparatuses use soft methods in order to what to say, control or oppress people hegemonically. Say, for example, hegemony. Though I'm not going to say elaborate it upon, we can simply say hegemony controls your thoughts, controls your actions. It is like you can choose any color as long as it is black, as long as it is blue, which means you have left with no choice. You can. It appears that you are making the choice, but the choice is not yours. The choice is already pre-given. So in ideology, through education, through religion, through family, through various soft methods, a person's mind is getting schooled. How you behave, how you, what to say, act, and how to bring good characteristics in you, how to be an obedient student, how to become a law-abiding citizen. All these are ideological. Without using violence, without using, what to say, repressive methods or forces, very easily people can be controlled using ideological methods, which was very detailedly explained by Louis Althusser as a neo-Marxist. And then you have, what to say, gender theories, very importantly, feminist men and LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and queer theories. Feminist theories, as I have mentioned, which deal more with the feminist concerns. But again, it is not a kind of universal theory to evaluate literary texts or, what to say, social activism. Why? Because though women or female, to be called as a female is a kind of biological phenomenon, the problems faced by women are not the same all over the world. Say, for example, just imagine what kind of problems an American woman would face, what kind of problem an Arabic woman would face, what kind of problems a woman from South Korea would face, and North Korea would face. And even within India, just think about, what to say, a woman who is employed in a multinational company and a woman who is a peasant. So each and every woman or what to say, girl is facing a different problem. So though feminism is trying to address the problems of women, it is not universal, it is not the same. So that is feminist theories, and there are different waves in it, the first wave, second wave, third wave, and all that. And there are different schools of thought, the French school, the British school, and all that. I slightly, what to say, inclined towards the British feminist idea. Why? Because more than being a rebel, the energy of being a woman, that has to be employed. So that is feminism. And men's studies are getting a kind of momentum these days, which is not, what to say, a very popular theory, but men do have problems. Men do have weaknesses. Men do have their own, what to say, issues. All these are addressed in men's studies, especially Andrew Kimbrell, as a very important theorist. He has done a very elaborate research. Again, this comes from a kind of sociological study, who has, what to say, theorized various issues faced by men, and he has categorized men into different kinds. And then you have this LGBT queer community theories, especially Judith Butler, who is very popular in promulgating a theory called the performativity in her book called Gender Trouble. Performativity is, what to say, a popular theory in queer studies. Why? Because she simply puts the idea that gender itself is performative. Sex is biological, whereas gender is performative. She slightly alters the Cartesian dictum that I think, therefore I exist, into I perform, therefore I exist, which means all our gender roles are learned and performed. Say, for example, we don't know who exactly prescribed the norms for the behavior of men and women. But men have certain set of behaviors and women have certain set of behaviors. And if a man is behaving differently, or if he is having certain, what to say, bodily movements, or the way he talks is feminine, he is called effeminate, or even he is mocked at. Okay, which means these behaviors are something which we learn. Say, for example, from the society, from our what to say, neighborhood, from our fathers, relatives, friends. Okay, gender roles are really learned. This is why she says gender role can be acquired and performed. And then you have psychological theories, especially the Freudian, Lacanian, and Jungian. Freud, who has divided the human mind into three parts: the id, ego, and superego. The id is the instinctive drive in which people have all their impulses, and the ego is something which, what to say, really controls your behavior, and the superego is acting upon the moral principle. You can go for different kinds of study in applying Freudian theories. You can go for the authorial study. You can go for the characters in the novel, trying to examine the unconscious, trying to examine the motives of their actions and all that. In fact, the Hamlet's Oedipus complex itself is a kind of Freudian explanation given by Ernest Jones. And then you have Lacan, one of the most complex psychoanalysts. I think there is only one living scholar who can claim who has completely understood Lacan. All others can randomly understand some of his concepts, but to have a kind of complete understanding of Lacan would take, what to say, lots and lots of reading and research. Anyways, for our simple understanding, let us say, just like Freud, Lacan has, what to say, classified three different layers of the human evolution, okay, or rather three different stages: the imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. The imaginary is something in which, during the psychosexual development of the child imagines itself as part and parcel of its mother, which means the child is not recognizing itself as a separate entity. But around, to say, 12 to 18 months, the child, for the first time, realizes that I'm not a part of my mother, I am a separate individual. And that is called the mirror stage. which we can say the final stage of the imaginary one. And then the child enters into the symbolic, in other words, the domain of language. In symbolic state or the stage, the child acquires knowledge through language. In fact, we can even say the whole world is constituted through language to us. All of us can understand, can visualize many things which we have not seen, which we have not experienced through language. So that is the symbolic stage. Say, for example, when I say the golden mountain, how many of us have really seen a golden mountain? None of us. There is nothing like that. But the moment I say golden mountain, every one of us can visualize, at least for a second, a golden mountain in our mind's eye. Why? Because we are already familiar with the idea of gold, and we are also familiar with the idea of a mountain. So by combining these two with the help of language, we can envision, we can create an idea of a golden mountain. So that is the symbolic stage where the child is acquiring knowledge through language. And then the real. The real is the most complex idea of Lacan. Why? Because real is not something which is equivalent to reality. Reality is something what we witness, what we experience, and all that. Whereas in Lacanian terms, the real is something beyond human knowledge, something which has not still entered into human knowledge. That is what he calls real, which is a very complex arena to discuss. And then you have Jungian psychoanalysis, where he talks about the collective unconscious. Unlike Sigmund Freud, where he talks about the individual's unconscious, Jung talks about the collective unconscious, in which you have lots and lots of archetypes present. That is a very elaborate study. And another important area which is trending is the ecological studies or green studies. Cheryl Glotfelty, who is a very, very popular theorist in ecological surveys. And what to say, nowadays there are many scholars who even apply Tolkapier's Tine concepts to literary works in order to explain literary entities. And of course, we have another interesting idea called New Historicism, which is not exactly a historical approach. We can say it is a kind of quasi-historical approach. As Peter Barry puts it, you can study a literary work along with a co-text, with a context. Say, for example, I'm reading a novel or I'm reading a play in which, a lot of legal formalities and legal elements are infused. I can also refer to the legal documents of that particular period in order to understand better how the non-literary works or documents have influenced the literary work. Say, for example, The Merchant of Venice, in which you have a lot of legal formalities which are going on towards the end in the climax. So in order to understand The Merchant of Venice better, I need a co-text which is not literary. It is completely a kind of legal document which helps me in understanding The Merchant of Venice in a better manner. So reading a literary text in a context with a co-text is New Historicism. And then you have text and language-based approaches, especially in the modernist formalist approach. You have many of these concepts which are very popular: foregrounding, defamiliarization, objective correlative, which is popularized by T.S. Eliot and others. So in all these aspects, what you find is language is something which is made very prominent. How the language is employed in a literary work, that is their primary concern. In fact, T.S. Eliot has claimed Hamlet is a kind of artistic failure. Why? Because it lacks objective correlative. He simply verbally rambles about, but there is no concrete entity to demonstrate his mental agony or disturbance, to be or not to be. He simply rambles, right? And then you have another important, most popular approach in the modernist era. There is new criticism, which very strongly advocated close reading of text. But I really wonder whether such close reading would be possible for larger texts, especially novels such as War and Peace and all that. But anyhow, close reading was something which they recommended, especially in reading poetry. So what is the connection between form and content? So that is their primary concern. It is form and the content, both should have a kind of organic unity in order to produce meaning, primarily in using literary devices such as irony, tension, etc., etc. And also they spoke about the affective and intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy is something which talks about going for or hunting for the author's intention in writing a text is fallacious. Similarly, what kind of impact a literary work makes on a reader, that is also fallacious. So these are all the ideas which are promulgated by new critics, including ambiguity. So William Emerson's 7 Types of Ambiguity was a popular work during that particular era. And obviously you have structuralist approaches, especially in the 1970s. Structuralism was creating huge waves all over the academic circles. In almost all the Western universities, structuralism has become very, very popular. Why? Because though it belongs to the linguistic domain, it's been producing wonderful results in anthropology, very importantly. Claude Lévi-Strauss has, wonderfully shown how structuralist principles can be used in examining, humankind in anthropology. His Raw and Cooked is a very, very important work where he has compared the various cultures and all that. In other words, we can simply say the very basic tenet of structuralism. Everything and anything is part of a larger structure. In other words, nothing can be understood in isolation. So structuralist approach was very, very popular, except film semiotics. I think it has produced good results in all of the domains, especially in literature. Roland Barthes was a very popular figure. Of course, he later on moved to post-structuralism, but anyhow, his Yes Bar Is It was a tremendous work which has demonstrated how structuralist approach can help to examine or to probe into a literary work, especially the 5 different codes, whatever he has explained, was really, really still relevant. Any text, you can really apply those semi-code, the poetic code, the cultural code, the symbolic code, etc. So that is very, very interesting approach for literature. And then you have the post-structuralist approaches, especially deconstruction. But I wouldn't call deconstruction as a theory. Why? Because it is not derived from any, sociological data. In my opinion, it is a reading method. How do you read a text? Say, for example, a text may have a kind of established meaning already. But when you go for a kind of deconstructive reading, you will bring in completely a different meaning or a meaning which is contrary to it. I think it is Paul de Man who has read Tiger, William Blake's Tiger, in a different manner. So Tiger is usually read as a kind of poem which wonders at the strength of God or the power of God, where he is raising a question whether are you the one who has created the innocent lamb has also created this ferocious tiger. So that is where the poem ends, which is really wondering at the beauty of nature or the creator's job. Paul de Man was, mockingly or teasingly anti-reads the same text. He brings in a completely different interpretation. Say, for example, I ate the meat of lamb that did not do anything to my stomach, whereas when I consumed the meat of the tiger, that is really troubling my stomach. And then he posed the same question. Are you the one who has created the lamb, has also created the tiger? So that is how this anti-reading happens. In other words, we can say a deconstructive reading is a kind of what to say, reading against the grain, where you look for various slipperies by the authors and expose them to the reader. And another important approach is reader-oriented approach. Of course, you have this reader response theory. And again, here you have different schools of thought. Say, for example, in the case of Lucy Rosenblatt, you have efferent and aesthetic reading method. In the efferent reading, a reader reads a text and he is not remembering or retaining the whole. It is not about the retaining capacity of the reader, but because of his knowledge, because of his education, because of his interest, he could retain only a few elements from the text. So what are those deciding factors? To probe into that, you will go for this efferent reading study. And then you have this aesthetic reading. More than what is retained after the reading, the experience that is undergone by the reader is the aesthetic reading. And also you have another important theorist like Wolfgang Iser, who is bringing in a kind of a phenomenological approach towards reading. In other words, how perspective becomes very important when you read a text, where he is differentiating between the implied reader and the actual reader. In the case of an implied reader, it is something which is created, the reader is created by the text, which means the text would dominate, or the text would take control of the reader. Whereas in the case of an actual reader, the reader creates the meaning. He cannot be controlled by the text. Instead, there's a kind of negotiation between the reader and the text, and then the meaning emerges, and the meaning need not be the same for all. Each and every reader would have different meanings or different interpretations. And then you also have Stanley Fish, who brought in the idea of affective stylistics, which is completely against the idea of the affective fallacy. Whereas the new critics were strongly against the impact a text is going to make on the reader. In the case of Stanley Fish, he is advocating that is also part and parcel of, a theoretical approach. What kind of effect, what kind of impact a text is going to make on the reader, that is also very important. And the next important term is postmodernism, which is highly subjected to various debates and discussions, especially in the 20th century. There are many more theorists, many theorists, especially when it comes to postmodernism. I'm not citing all of them, but some of them are very crucial. So, which is why I have chosen Baudrillard, Lyotard, and Jameson. In the case of Baudrillard, he brings in the idea of hyperrealism or virtual reality, where the whole world is hyperreal, which means we are all, like we are in a part of a video game. The whole world is constructed. Simply put, what is the difference between a theme park and the world outside a theme park? We can understand the theme park, which is a fabrication, which is not a real world. So you go there, you enjoy for some time. There will be the BGP Golden Beach or MG, the other theme parks, the ECR. And the moment you step out, you think you are in the real world. But when you look closely, there is no difference between the theme park and the outer world. In the sense, the theme park is man-made, it is fabricated. Similarly, the outer world is also fabricated, it is also constructed. Okay, so the whole world is in hyperreal. And Lyotard, Francois Lyotard, a very important French theorist, who is arguing that postmodernism is the era in which people have lost their faith towards meta narratives. These meta-narratives or grand narratives are something which would promise or give hope through some means, let it be a kind of political ideology or religious practices, whatever. And every religion is aiming at giving salvation. And every political ideology is promising, what to say, a welfare nation. Now, in the postmodernist era, people have lost faith in all that. So instead of these grand narratives or meta narratives, the people are going for mini narratives and micro narratives, which are, what to say, uh, narrated, spoken, and what to say, shared within mini communities. And a writer, say for example, in great epics, the protagonist and the antagonist, all of them are great people. Let it be Ram and Ravana or Christ and Saturn and all that. But in a micro narrative and a mini narrative, any ordinary individual who is not even in the mainstream of society can be a protagonist. When I say the mainstream, a doctor or an engineer or a professor or to say people who are in any other profession and all that. These mini narratives and micro narratives are focusing on the people who are at the fringes. When I say fringes, it is not that they're all marginalized. They are the people who can never ever come into the mainstream. They can be thieves, they can be to say sick people, they can be prostitutes, to say flesh traders, whatever. So such narratives are the micro narratives. They are also coming to the center stage in the postmodern era. And another important theorist, Frederick Jameson, who completely takes a kind of say, Marxist outlook to it, especially he calls it the late capitalism. The late capitalism is the era in which um, anything and everything can be commodified. Anything. In fact, right from literary texts to visual texts, more than anything else, what really matters is the surface, not the depth. Because initially, when you read a literary work or when you read a poem, what you looked for was the depth. What is the deeper meaning in that? Nowadays, the depth is lost, the surface has taken over. So that is Jameson. He is giving a very elaborate description, taking a Marxist outlook towards postmodernism. And another important area is film theory. Again, you can give the same kind of treatment, whichever you give to literary texts and other texts to films too. However, I have chosen only two areas to briefly introduce. One is auteur theory and film semiotics. Why? Because these two are film specific. Say, for example, you can also do a Marxist study, you can also do a feminist study, you can also do a psychological study in films. But still, auteur theory is something which is made popular by the American reviewer Andrew Saris, who said not all film directors can be placed on the throne of an auteur. Auteur is the French term for author. Okay. Why? Because there are some filmmakers who have a specific ideology or a message to be conveyed to their viewers. But there are wonderful filmmakers who make great films which are commercially successful. I'm not saying that auteurs would make only art cinema, which is quite boring to watch. It is not that I mean. There are wonderful auteurs who were quite successful commercially too. But they had certain, what to say, important ingredients in their films. Firstly, they will have their own specific style, which will be prevalent, which can be sensed throughout all their movies. They will have a kind of special technical competence, which can be sensed in their movies. Apart from these two, very importantly, they will have an interior message to share. So that is what really makes a filmmaker into an auteur. And then you have film semiotics. Semiotics, you know very well, it is a study of signs. Now the question is, cinema is something which is very easy to understand. What is there to interpret? But still, In the case of semiotics, when you apply semiotic theories to cinema, you can find multiple layers and hidden meanings in cinema too. And there are many theorists like Kaja Silverman, Umberto Eco, and very importantly, Christian Metz and all that. And these are some of the recent developments in theory. Very importantly, the post-truth era. How truth itself is fabricated and presented to public to make them believe in it. So here, the emotions and beliefs versus facts. Whether it is television channels or the social media, they can all subscribe to certain ideas and very strongly present one idea as the truth. And the truth is something which is really beyond the grasp of the common people. So, as Harari would put it, information is so replete in today's life. But as consumers, we need to have the discretion to choose what is viable, what is really sensible. So another important domain is medical humanities. I think this is the need of the hour. Of course, initially there was something called literature of the sick people or sick literature or literature of illness and all that. But in the present era, especially in the pandemic and post-pandemic situation, how medical service has become medical industry. In this juncture, there are certain thinkers and scholars who are trying to bring in a new dimension to literature by bringing in this area called medical humanities, where you have autobiographies, journals, and letters exchanged by sick people who suffered terminal illnesses. Let it be cancer or HIV or some other terminal illness, people who have suffered and went through an ordeal. They have shared their pain and agony and how they survived that particular disease and all that in the form of autobiographies. And those have become very important documents to understand the pain and agony of a survivor. And then you have disability studies, which is again gaining momentum. How disabled people are represented in literature, let it be visually challenged people or orthopedically challenged people and all that. And trauma studies, which is again a medical term psychologically. There are many situations which would induce trauma in the mind of people. Say, for example, World War or a civil war, or a kind of internal restlessness might cause great trauma to people. Sometimes the individuals might undergo traumatic experiences through an accident or some unspeakable mishap and abuse and all that. So that is trauma theory, and memory studies is also gaining momentum these days, especially things or events which are of historical importance, how they have remained in the memory of people when they write their books. Especially as far as India is concerned, more than the freedom struggle, the partition was one tragic incident which has brought in lots and lots of traumatic experiences to people. And when the people write their experiences in the form of memoirs and books, their memories are playing a very vital role because they're all not written immediately. The event has happened long back, and they try to bring back certain memories in their mind, and they try to present in the form of biographies or fictional works. So that is memory studies. And finally, this is one important question which remains in all our minds: how to apply theory, right from the classical concepts to the most recent developments. There are many more theories and approaches available. So what I have to choose? Very simply, don't go from theory to text. at first, you'll have to be thorough with the text. And then, if that particular text is suitable for, what to say, using any theory, then we can apply it. Just because you like a theory, don't try to squeeze the theory into the text. The text should, what to say, subscribe itself to the theoretical approach that you are ready to